The mist which hangs before you offers you a choice: to pass through or to escape. Beyond it are stories that reveal humanity shining through war's cruelty, moments where both enmity and friendship, pride and survival collide. You alone are left to discern what to believe as you pass through what we call the fog of war. Eduardo Fernández saw his aircraft catch fire and pulled the ejection handle. Below, the frozen island awaited him. So did the crew of the British ship he had just sunk. Now, to survive, he would need to cooperate with his enemies. It was the 12th day of the Falklands War. Eduardo Fernández was one of the youngest pilots in the Argentine Air Force. At 25, with 127 flight hours and 23 successful missions, his service record was impeccable. Taking off from Buenos Aires, he was on his final mission. The target seemed simple: sink one of the British fleet's main ships. Eduardo knew this could change the war's fate. Alone in his aircraft, he felt that familiar excitement. Every pilot knows it. The adrenaline burst when spotting the target. But this time was different. This time Eduardo thought it might be his last mission. British ships began appearing on his radar screen. Eduardo brought his aircraft down to sea level. The radar altimeters showed 30 feet. Ships were now clearly visible on the horizon. The largest was probably an aircraft carrier. But Eduardo chose a smaller destroyer. Better chance of a precise hit. He pressed the Exocet missile launch button. The missile separated from the aircraft and began low-level flight over the sea surface. Eduardo didn't take his eyes off the screen. It took 37 seconds. The missile struck HMS Sheffield's side with a direct hit. The explosion was so violent, it shook Eduardo's aircraft. The ship immediately caught fire, thick black smoke rising into the sky. Eduardo tried to suppress his triumph, but couldn't. He had accomplished his mission. While reporting to control and turning onto his return route, the radar warning system began screaming. British Harrier fighters had spotted Eduardo. There were 2 of them, approaching very fast. Eduardo's fuel was low. There was no chance of escape. The first missile missed. Eduardo tried to maneuver, but his aircraft had slowed. The second missile hit his left wing directly. The aircraft went out of control. Eduardo gripped the ejection seat and shot himself out. Falling from 2,000 feet, the wind dragged him eastward toward the island. Descending by parachute, he observed below frozen ground, rocks, and in the distance, a group of people. Most likely British sailors rescued from the ship he had sunk. Eduardo realized then that the real war was about to begin. When he hit the ground, his left arm was broken. He tried to free himself from the parachute, but the pain in his arm was unbearable. It took 10 minutes of struggle to free himself. He checked his survival kit: water, 3 days' food, flare gun, first aid supplies. Not enough to survive a Malvinas winter. The temperature was -10 degrees, the wind sharp and merciless. He tried to hide, but it was too late. 3 British soldiers emerged from behind rocks and surrounded him. The old sergeant approached, saw Eduardo was injured. He gave sharp commands in English, but Eduardo understood something from his tone. These men wouldn't kill him, at least not now. The British sergeant was Michael Thompson. Their conversation was limited to the few English words Eduardo knew, but they were trying to communicate. Thompson had realized Eduardo was a pilot. His flight suit, helmet, everything was obvious. And the aircraft that sank Sheffield had come from here. Thompson gave orders to his soldiers. Young Private Jenkins approached Eduardo and examined his arm. It was broken and needed immediate treatment. Eduardo was surprised. Why were they helping him? Just an hour ago, he had sunk one of their ships. He had caused the deaths of 20 men. While Jenkins splinted his arm, he looked at Eduardo and nodded, as if he understood what he was going through. Both were young men. Both were dragged into war, forced to try killing each other. That night, Eduardo stayed in the British soldiers' temporary camp. Thompson gave him a blanket, Jenkins rebandaged his arm, Davis offered him hot soup. Eduardo observed them. Thompson kept looking at a photograph. Probably his family. Jenkins was writing a letter, his hand trembling with the pen. Davis was reading a book, but his eyes weren't scanning the pages. These weren't enemies. These were men who wanted to go home, just like Eduardo. Thompson was trying to communicate with his superiors by radio. Eduardo didn't know English, but could tell from his tone. He wondered what was being planned for him. But what he really wondered was whether his own people were searching for him. The next morning, Thompson spoke with his superior. No one would come for Eduardo. British command also reported they couldn't spare resources. Eduardo would stay with this small team for now. Thompson tried to explain the situation to Eduardo. He understood somewhat. Neither Argentine nor British forces would organize an operation for him. Everyone was busy with their own war. For Eduardo, this was shocking. He had fought for his country, completed a successful mission, but now he was abandoned. The war machine no longer needed him. Thompson gently touched his shoulder. His eyes were understanding. This man also served the same system. He knew the same feeling of abandonment. As days passed, Eduardo began bonding with the small group. There was a language barrier, but people found ways to understand each other. Jenkins showed him photos of his family. He had a wife and 2 little daughters. Eduardo also took out the photo from his wallet, his fiancée Maria. Davis loved music, had a small harmonica. He would play in the evenings. Eduardo could also play guitar, but of course had no guitar. Still, he had hummed a few Argentine melodies to Davis. Thompson was the quietest, but Eduardo noticed he constantly studied maps, calculated their positions. This man carried the weight of responsibility. Eduardo knew that same weight. Being a pilot, being able to decide people's lives, was heavy. On the 4th day, everything changed. Davis had detected movement while on watch. South, about 2 kilometers away, an Argentine Special Forces patrol team was advancing. Thompson made calculations on the map. This team was probably looking for British positions. 12 men with heavy weapons. When Eduardo heard the situation, his heart raced. His own soldiers could reach him. He could be rescued. He could go home. But there was a problem. This patrol wasn't looking for Eduardo. It was trying to kill British soldiers. And Eduardo now knew these 3 men. Thompson looked at him. Both faced the same dilemma. Eduardo couldn't sleep that night. A patrol from his own army was nearby. He could signal them, make himself known. He could be rescued. But Jenkins had treated his arm. Thompson had given him food. Davis had played music for him. These men hadn't treated him like an enemy. And Eduardo had realized something else. This patrol wasn't looking for him. Argentine command had declared him missing, but no one was making an effort to bring him back. There was no special operation for him. But there was a death order for these 3 British soldiers. Eduardo wrestled with this dilemma until morning. Patriotism or humanity? Duty or conscience? By dawn, he had decided. In the morning, Eduardo approached Thompson. With a few English words he knew, he tried to explain the situation. He told him his own soldiers were nearby. But they weren't looking for Eduardo. He explained they had come to kill Thompson and the others. Thompson was surprised. Why was Eduardo refusing his chance at rescue? Eduardo gave the answer in simple words. These men had treated him like a human. Now they were his people too. When Jenkins and Davis learned the situation, they remained silent. This Argentine pilot was warning them, sacrificing his own rescue. Thompson thanked Eduardo, then asked, how would they get out of this situation? Eduardo smiled. He had known Malvinas Island since childhood. He would come with his grandfather, herding sheep. He knew secret places. Eduardo led them to an old sheep shelter, a place among rocks, sheltered from wind but invisible from outside. His grandfather had shown him this place. As a child, he would come here to play hide and seek. Now this game was a matter of life and death. The Argentine patrol team approached. Eduardo recognized them. The commander was Lieutenant Morales, Eduardo's friend from military school. Eduardo watched his friend with a heavy heart. He had known Carlos for 10 years. They had graduated from the same class, sworn oaths with the same ideals. Now Carlos was looking for him, but thought he was dead. Morales gave instructions to his soldiers. They would search every cave, every crevice. British soldiers were nearby. Eduardo's heart broke hearing his friend's voice. Carlos hadn't changed at all. Same determined tone, same leadership presence. Thompson came beside him, quietly asking what was happening. Eduardo whispered his friend's name. Thompson understood. This was beyond personal now. Morales' team was searching everywhere. They approached the shelter. Eduardo held his breath, heart pounding. If they were caught, what would happen? If Carlos saw Eduardo with the British, what would he think? Would he call it treason? Eduardo didn't know the answers to these questions, and didn't want to know. Hours passed. The Argentine patrol team was searching the area thoroughly. At one point, they came so close, Eduardo could hear Carlos breathing. Thompson, Jenkins, and Davis remained motionless. Eduardo signaled them. They retreated deeper. The shelter was a narrow but deep cave. Eduardo had gone to its end as a child. They would be safer there. Carlos's voice gradually faded. They were searching in other directions. Eduardo breathed a sigh of relief. But he knew this was only temporary salvation. Carlos wouldn't give up. He would continue searching until he found these men. When evening came, Eduardo assessed the situation. The patrol team had returned to camp, but would come back tomorrow. They would conduct a more systematic search. He explained his plan to Thompson. On the island's west coast was an old fisherman's shelter. If they could reach there, they could signal the British fleet for help. But the route was dangerous. They needed to cross open terrain. And Eduardo's arm was still broken. Thompson, Jenkins, and Davis discussed the situation. Their options were limited. Either they would be caught here or try to escape. Eduardo told them one more thing. If they were caught, they would say they didn't know him. Eduardo was a captured pilot, nothing more. They left at midnight. Eduardo led the way. The British soldiers followed. Moonlight lit their path, but also exposed them. After walking for 2 hours, Eduardo's arm began to ache. Jenkins supported him. Thompson and Davis watched the surroundings. At one point, they saw the fire the patrol team had lit at camp. They were so close they could hear voices. When Eduardo heard his friends' voices, he stopped. Carlos was singing a song Eduardo also knew, a nostalgic melody from childhood. Thompson understood Eduardo's situation. He put his shoulder to the man. Sometimes war separated people from their loved ones. At dawn, they reached the fisherman's shelter. an old ruined structure but sheltered from wind. Thompson prepared the radio. He contacted the British fleet, reported their position, requested rescue. They waited for a response. Eduardo sat on the shore, looking at the ocean. This war had changed him. He could no longer think as before. The concepts of enemy and friend had become blurred. Thompson came beside him. A helicopter would come soon. They would take Eduardo too. He would be a prisoner of war, but would be safe. Eduardo nodded. This outcome was best for everyone. When the British rescue helicopter arrived, Eduardo looked at the island one last time. His childhood had passed here. Now he was leaving as a different person. Thompson thanked him. Eduardo thanked him too. Both had said the same thing, but in different languages. Jenkins showed his bandaged broken arm, smiled. Davis took out his harmonica and played one last time. As Eduardo boarded the helicopter, he looked back. 3 British soldiers were waving at him. These men who had been his enemies a few days ago were now his friends. War was a strange thing. It could make people enemies, but it could also bring them closer. Eduardo's prisoner of war period lasted 6 months. He was treated well in the British camp, held under conditions compliant with the Geneva Convention. During this time, he thought a lot. He questioned war's purpose, humanity's meaning, the boundaries of friendship and enmity. He couldn't meet Thompson, Jenkins, and Davis again, but never forgot them. Those 3 men had taught him something more valuable than war: humanity. When the war ended, Eduardo returned to Argentina. He was welcomed as a hero, known as the pilot who sank Sheffield. But Eduardo never shared the real story with anyone, because no one would understand. When Eduardo came home, his fiancée Maria ran to him. But Eduardo had changed. War had made him someone else. His friends congratulated him. The press wanted interviews. His commanders announced his promotion. Eduardo thanked them all, but felt empty inside. He couldn't tell the real story. He couldn't tell what Thompson, Jenkins, and Davis had done for him. Because this was a story official history couldn't accept. Years passed. Eduardo was promoted in the Air Force. The Sheffield victory opened doors for him, but he was never happy. Every May 2nd, on Malvinas Day, he was asked to give speeches. Eduardo would talk about patriotism, but think about Thompson, Jenkins, and Davis inside. One day Maria asked him, "Why are you always sad? Why aren't you happy even though you're a hero?" Eduardo couldn't answer. How could he explain? How could he say that enemy soldiers had treated him better than his friends? In the 1990s, Eduardo was already a colonel. One day he decided to search for Thompson, Jenkins, and Davis through internet research. He found Michael Thompson, living in England, retired. Eduardo wrote him a letter. Thompson replied he had never forgotten Eduardo either. Jenkins had died of a heart attack in 1985. Davis was living in Australia, had become a farmer. In his letter, Thompson wrote, "Those days spent in Malvinas had completely changed his thoughts about war." In 2007, Eduardo met Thompson in London. They met face to face for the first time in 25 years. Both had aged, their hair had grayed, but they recognized each other. Thompson showed him Jenkins's photograph. He read a letter from Davis. All 3 had never forgotten Eduardo. That evening, Thompson told Eduardo, "You reminded us of our humanity. It would have been lost in war, but you saved it." Eduardo replied, "You taught me that friendship, not enmity, is important." Eduardo's story remained secret for years. It didn't appear in official records. But in 2012, on the 30th anniversary of the Malvinas War, Eduardo told the truth. In an interview, he revealed the whole story: how enemy soldiers helped him, how he protected them, how friendship was stronger than war. His story resonated widely. Some called him a hero, others called him a traitor. But Eduardo didn't care. He had simply told the truth. In 2019, Eduardo died at age 62. Only his family and close friends attended his funeral. But a wreath came from England. Michael Thompson had sent it. The card on the wreath read, "To friendship, to humanity, and to Eduardo." Eduardo's story is still told today, in war museums, at peace conferences, in military academies. Because this story isn't just a pilot's story, it's humanity's story. Eduardo Fernández sank a ship in Malvinas. But at the same time, he did something more important. He built a bridge of humanity. In the middle of war, at the peak of enmity, friendship bloomed. And this friendship emerged stronger than war. Because wars end, but friendships live forever.